absolutely love autumn because of the abundance of apples available almost anywhere. Yes, I have been working on my alliteration. I'm very excited because today we are relaunching one of my very favorite series on the channel. It's called In Season, and we are celebrating apple season. First up, we are going to make some healthy baked apple chips. These are so simple and they only involve 2 ingredients, apples and cinnamon. That's it. Next, I'm going to show you some amazing roast chicken with some roast apples, butternut squash, and Brussels sprouts. Doesn't that sound like the perfect autumn dinner? And finally, for dessert, I'm going to show you an amazing little apple tart. These are all the rage on Pinterest right now. They're called apple roses. And I love them because they're super easy to put together, but they look so impressive. But let's kick things off today with my baked apple chips. I love these because you can really use any type of apple you like. Today, I'm going to be using some Gala apples and some Golden Delicious apples. Those are 2 of my all-time favorites. To make sure that we get our chips sliced really thin, I'm going to be using a mandolin. Now you could do this with a super sharp kitchen knife, but I just find the mandolin makes this a little easier and then you get a nice consistent thickness with all of your apples. Word to the wise though, mandolins are no joke. They have a really sharp blade and it is super easy to cut yourself, like I did earlier today. Fingers out of the way, people. And what you have are these beautiful apple slices. I'm looking at about 2 millimeters per apple slice. Now that my apples are all sliced up, I've got some baking sheets that are lined with some parchment paper, and I'm just going to lay all of my apple slices out on the parchment-lined baking sheet. Now, I have made the mistake before of overlapping the apples, and they totally stick and they don't dry out. So don't do that. We are going to finish them off with a nice sprinkle of cinnamon. You can totally skip this step, but come on, apples and cinnamon in autumn, this is just a match made in heaven. All right, now that we've got these all sprinkled up into the oven, they are going to go at 225 degrees for 1 hour. After an hour, we are going to take these beauties out of the oven, flip them over, sprinkle them with a little more cinnamon, and then back into the oven they go for another hour. Now I know this sounds like a lot of cooking time, but basically what we're trying to do is dehydrate these apples. We're trying to remove all of the moisture. So we need to do that low and slow, otherwise the apples will burn. After another hour, we are going to turn our heat off completely, and instead of removing the apples from the oven, we're just going to leave them in there for another half hour or so. This is going to help them dry out completely so they end up with a nice crunch. I just love how these turned out. They look gorgeous, and they also happen to be totally healthy. How great is that? Next up, I want to show you an amazing, easy weeknight dinner idea. What I love about this recipe is that it can all be thrown together in a single roasting pan, and boom, you only have 1 dish to take care of. How great is that? That is always handy on weeknights. Am I right? All right, so in our roasting pan, we are going to combine some butternut squash that I've just peeled and seeded and chopped, and some Brussels sprouts that I've trimmed. We're also going to add some beautiful sliced apples. I love this recipe because you can really use any kind of apples you like. To all of this beautiful veg, I'm going to add some chopped onion and some fresh sage and fresh thyme. I love these 2 herbs in the fall because they just have such a rich flavor, and they remind me a lot of Thanksgiving. And there is nothing bad about that. All right, we're gonna toss this all together really well with a good glug of olive oil, some salt and pepper, and then we are going to get to work on our chicken. For this recipe, I'm using some chicken legs that I've left the skin on, but you could also use some pork chops if that's what you had on hand. That would be equally delicious. There is a single joint in between a thigh and a leg. Once you find it, you are in the promised land. If you hit bone, you are too far over and you need to move. Aha! So I'm simply going to cut my legs in half and then arrange them on top of all of my beautiful vegetables. I'm going to hit them with a little more salt and a little more pepper and some fresh thyme. Then into the oven it goes at 375 until the chicken is cooked through and has reached an internal temperature of 165 degrees Fahrenheit. I absolutely love this dish because it combines all of the wonderful flavors of fall. How easy was that? Weeknight dinner taken care of in under an hour with only a single dish. Yeah, I'd call that success. Finally today, I want to show you a darling dessert that is all the rage online right now. Now, I want to give credit where credit is due. This is actually from an awesome YouTuber named Manuela, and I've included the original link in the description box below because it really is incredible. All right, so we are getting started today with a red delicious apple because the ruby red color is most reminiscent of the color of a beautiful red rose. What I do is basically just cut out the core of the apple. Now, if you have an apple core, go right ahead, my beautiful friends. Remove the core and cut it into really thin slices. It is super important that you use a very sharp knife for this, otherwise you could risk getting injured. If you're not confident with your knife skills, you can also use the mandolin that we talked about earlier. That will get the job done too. Now that I've finished slicing my apple, I'm going to put it into a heat-proof dish and cover it with a little bit of lemon juice to prevent it from browning and some hot water. The idea is to just soften them up so that they're not breaking when we go to use them. You could also do this by putting the apples in the microwave for 45 seconds or so. While my apples are soaking, I'm going to mix together a little bit of granulated sugar and some cinnamon. This, I think, is the perfect addition to these yummy apple roses. Next, I'm going to get to work on some puff pastry. Now for this recipe, I am using store-bought puff pastry, and I will tell you why. Because puff pastry is a fickle thing. Now if you are an expert at puff pastry, I highly recommend using your homemade version. I'm sure that would be better. But store-bought will totally work in this case. You definitely want to throw some flour down on your surface to make sure it doesn't stick. Next, I'm just going to give my puff pastry a quick roll with a rolling pin and cut it into 4 equal pieces. What we're looking for are rectangles that are about 2.5 inches by 12 inches. But honestly, you don't have to really worry about measurements. This is art, not science. So we're going to drain the water from our apples and get started on building my roses. To do that, I'm going to use a pastry brush and simply brush some melted butter over the surface of my pastry. In life, we all know everything is better with melted butter. Next, I'm going to line the top edge of my pastry with my slices of apples, making sure they overlap by about half. Then I'm going to sprinkle it with a little bit of cinnamon sugar and then fold up the bottom half of my pastry over my apples. I'm going to hit this with a little more melted butter and some cinnamon sugar, and then I'm going to create my rose. I'm simply going to start at one end and roll the entire pastry up until it's created a rose. Then I'm just going to pinch the seam together to make sure it stays together. I've got some ramekins standing by that I've greased with butter, and I'm just going to put my rose into a ramekin. This is going to help it stay together. You could also do this with a silicone baking pan if that's what you had. Once all of my roses are formed, I'm going to place the ramekins into the oven right on the rack at 375 degrees for between 45 minutes and an hour. Keep a really good eye on them because you don't want the apples to start to burn. If you do see them browning too quickly, just throw a piece of tinfoil over. That will prevent them from burning while the puff pastry finishes cooking. Trust me when I tell you, these taste as good as they look. I really hope you'll give these tasty recipes a try, and if you do, be sure to tweet or Instagram me a photo because you guys know I love seeing what you're coming up with in your very own kitchens. And if there are any fruits or veggies that you'd like to see on an upcoming episode of In Season, be sure to leave it in the comments section below. And finally, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to The Domestic Geek because there is lots more deliciousness where this came from.